So, my name's Akua Gyamfi, and it's my honor to have a little chit chat with director and co-writer of Nickel Boys, RaMell Ross. Welcome.
Is my people with the camera? Is my face too shaded?
With the hat.
Okay, cool.
Hey, would you have taken it off for us?
Want me to?
No. I'm saying, would you have taken it
Oh,
off?
of course, of course.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't want to be Katie and too hidden up here. But it's comfortable.
It's comfortable. You
Yeah.
look good. Welcome
Thank you.
and thank you. We were told that there was a round of applause. What's it like hearing or feeling audience reactions when you've sat in and seen the response to Nickel Boys? What's it been like?
It's bizarre because I think when I watch the film with others, and I do often, I like to watch people as well. And I think people are generally more stoic than in normal films, a little bit less animated, very settled. And for me, I can't read what that means, And then afterwards, mostly people don't move and no one really talks. And then you're just like, damn, that really bombed. But, mainly it's because of the film, but you really just never know, So, but the conversations have been deeply rich and actually profound at times. And so that's really how I know the film.
And then, so when you watched the first final cut of your work, what was your immediate reaction? Were you silent? Were you stoic? Were you kind of lost in your emotions?
I love the question because it just speaks to my inability to see it as you all. Because every image came from my imagination, negotiating them in the mind for like 2 years with Jocelyn Barnes, of course, my co-writer. And because the process of shooting them is incremental, the process of editing is a longitudinal process that was the most terrifying part of making the film. And that final cut was on the heels of a director's cut and a producer's cut. That lock was more a sigh of relief than it was an experience of what it is as a whole. I think more distance from the making time or the finishing time, which was about a year and a half. I think I can get closer to answering your question in like a real way.
Yeah.
But at this point, it's just like, it's still the piece.
Yeah, I get it. I understand that. So you've transitioned from factual storytelling with I still haven't seen it, which I don't like to admit.
Unbelievable.
I know. Hell County this morning, this evening, your documentary.
Who's seen Hell County this morning, this evening?
Proud of you guys. Well done.
If I had money, I would give it to you guys.
Yeah.
And everyone else wouldn't get it.
I mean, I'll blame living in the UK, because obviously everyone in America would have seen it, right? We hope.
All 300 million.
Yeah, everyone's seen it. But what was that? How did you kind of borrow what you learned, what you knew, what you were decisive about from doing that documentary to bring into Nickel Boys? How did you kind of make that stew?
Wow, I think I could maybe talk you all into oblivion, or at least sleep, with the answer to that question. So I'll try to talk a little bit.
No, we're listening. We're engaged.
No, it's I love the question as the initial one because, one thing I found just from talking with folks, especially those who don't know much about my work, is that they feel like this came out of nowhere, and they feel like the film. One guy asked me on a red carpet in our LA premiere a couple of days ago, are you just lucky or are you a genius? And I was like, neither, fam. Like, what are you talking? Like, I've been making images in Hell County for hardcore 15 years, and like trying to work out a lot of the issues that, have kind of peaked here.
Yeah.
But for those who haven't seen Hell County this evening, it's a film in which I follow two young guys, and I kind of live with them literally for about 5 years. And I had a house there. I taught in the community before. And to answer your question as succinctly as possible, when Hoop Dreams came out, Steve James' documentary, he had 400 hours of footage, right? And at the time, people were like, you are psychopathic. Why? That's so much time. How do you make a film with that? I had 1,300 hours of footage, right? So the process of the film, when you're looking at words and you look at the words for a long time and they start to fall apart and then they rebuild themselves and you're like, oh, what's language? What are words? I realized that people didn't look at people like that. You know, people don't look at people long enough for their social construction of race, for all of their identity to like legitimately dissolve and then rebuild itself, except for your family members, because you see them long enough. So I start to ask questions like, well, what if everyone photographed like they were their like what if every image across the history of the world had always been photographed as if the person making the image, either still or moving, was photographed like that person was a family member? Like the history of photography, the history of film, the history of the replacement of perception from other cultures to other cultures that photography and film inherently do would not be the same, you know? And so it was a process of looking, a process of waiting, letting that rebuild, and then for like the aleatoric to happen in a perfectly or well-framed image, to give the image a sort of experiential, a symbolic, and a metaphoric resonance, so that the reading of the image is in the minds of the viewer. And and then building the film out as kind of like an extension of, not extension of consciousness, but building the film out as a sort of sculpture, a time sculpture. So 1,300 hours, edited into 76 minutes. The film takes place, it's edited from sunup to sundown. There's 12 days over the course of the film, and it's organized into 5 visual movements. And so that kind of broached the feeling of what it felt like to actually be in one's own head while also being in reality, while remembering, while being present. Yeah. And then bring that into the lives of these two, where Jocelyn and I asked in the writing process, what if Elwood and Turner had their own cameras to make their own Hell County? Like, what would the film look like if you make the camera in Oregon, you know, which is an idea from Hell County?
Did you have any other way of doing it? Were you thinking, okay, can I just do it like everybody else does it? Or did it immediately when the story found you, you were like, it can only be told that way?
You know, I'm unsure if it could only be told that way, but I think I could only tell it that way.
Yeah, you yourself.
Yeah, because I think my biggest asset is that I didn't go to film school. Like, my biggest asset is that I'm like self-taught photographer, went to school for photography, for grad school for photography, lived in this community, and all the questions about representation and the capacity and limits and possibilities of the image, both moving and still, emerge from like negotiating my relationship between those who I know and trying to present them to the world, but not trying to have that image foreclose the imagination of the person in relationship to them. And so I just don't think about film in traditional ways, you know, like I just don't care about coverage, you know? And so I just got to build the film, and luckily, I think the biggest feat of this film is the producers that supported it, honestly.
I was going to say, because then when you're presenting your idea, obviously you've got the Hell documentary to be like, this is who I am, this is what I do. But then now I want to do it again. And with this story, particular story, which is based on a true story, is a difficult story. It's a universal, however, driven by a black narrative, black people, black story. Was it hard to convince them that you could do it again and you should do it again?
It wasn't hard to convince. You know, the adaptation, the book was brought to me by Jeremy Kleiner and Dee Dee Gardner from Plan B. They, and Coulson, of course, they asked me to do it because they liked Hell County, and they wanted, you know, because Hell County, the form is the content, like it's fluid in that way. They wanted that to be the case for this project. And so they were on board. But it doesn't mean, and I was privy to these conversations, it doesn't mean that the other folks in the larger system were on board with their vision of my vision. And so they insulated us. We didn't have pushback.
Okay.
We had tons of conversations, tons of stress tests, tons of presentations to people in rooms, in Zooms, in apartments where there was like beach fronts in the background, and like people are just like hanging out, and like the sun just looks, oh, the sun, I wish I was there. Yeah. But like had to convince them, well, had to present it to them, you know?
What's the stress test? Like, what were the parts that they were like, stress?
Well, the stress test is, you know, having to justify why point of view.
Yeah.
And having to justify why we're not seeing Elwood until the point we do. Why don't we just pop to a third person right now? Why do we need so many archival images? Why can't we just do with one or two? Why can't they just be in the montage, you know? And I find the questions very useful because it just forces you to articulate to yourself what you believe.
Yeah.
And I found that if I can't articulate to myself, then it's an emotional need. And it may not be actually intuitive. It may just be emotional, which I don't know the difference between the two necessarily, but I think you know what I'm saying.
I watched the film first. I watched Nickel Boys first. Then I'd heard of the book, but I didn't. I bought a different book from by Coulson. Bought the book, read it, and then watched it again. But in the seeing it first, reading the book, genius to you, because the book was everything as I read, as I was reading, is what I would have imagined. It is that my imagination in reading, and I'm a book reader. So the way that you captured the moments and the storytelling in the film version, I was like, yeah, this is my mind. And I think I felt like that before I read the book, and when I read the book, it kind of certified that. Did you read the book? Did you need to, or was it just?
Actually, yeah, never read the book.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, just making sure they're listening.
Just
No, definitely read the book, but
I was like,
wouldn't that be crazy though?
I mean, because you might have like.
Yeah, that'd have been the craziest. I was like, yo, I read the back cover, and I was like, this shit is deep.
This is it.
Yeah, I'm so moved.
But
That'd be crazy.
You could have got away with it. Could have been just like, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think I had the. Wait, so let me repeat what you're saying, or do you want to? Can you rephrase it? That when you read it, it resembled what the film was, or the process of reading it is the process.
It complemented what was in my mind as I was reading the book. It's very much my mind in reading. I don't know how to explain it any more sensibly than that, but it really did. I don't know if guys, anyone understand what I'm saying? Thank you.
Wait, who said yes? I think they're just being supportive.
I know, right?
Just kidding.
I don't know how to say it, but yeah, it's my mind in pictures.
Oh, yeah,
What you did.
But the pictures that you saw are not what came into your mind, but the book illustrated those pictures.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well done.
Yeah. I think.
And I guess it's like, yeah, maybe not. Did you read the book? Obviously, you read the book, but more like when you read the book, how did it inspire how you did it, and what the pacing, and what you chose to put in, and what you didn't.
You know, it actually inspired it by encouraging me with my amazing co-writer Jocelyn Barnes to reject it. Which sounds, I'll expand, expound, because the images that come up, one, I recognize them, and I think that they're moving in the case of the story, but they're aligned with an ecosystem of meaning inside Coulson's narrative that can't be reproduced in cinema. Yeah. It's only possible in literature form. And so trying to pick and choose which images and which moments you're going to take out of there, like, produces a fractured, lesser version of the book in which you feel like you're reading the book, but skipping over almost everything. Yeah. And so after many conversations, we're like, we actually need to distill the narrative to its deep essence, and then completely reimagine, what it looks like or what it is.
Thank you. So then, speaking of this beautiful cast that you've worked with, what was the process of finding the right people? Because they did their thing.
Yeah, they're the heart of it, right?
Yeah.
Ingenue Ellis Taylor was our #1 choice.
Why? What was it?
I think everyone wanted someone who was a woman in pop culture that had, not pop culture, a woman in the acting sphere that had a sort of an emotional weight that could be a young grandmother, but is expressive, has the capacity to be like a sort of dam in relationship to the emotion, where, we didn't want Ingenue to be like projectile tear. We wanted it to be on the face and just right there. And her track record, is she is that person. The boys were quite obvious when you looked at all the tapes, because in the same way that you meet 15 people and you just connect with one person, they just had a glow about them. Ethan had that optimism in his voice and in his face that was Elwood, that everyone else didn't quite have. And Brandon had this presentness and this, I like to say, a contortionist disposition, where you can't tell whether or not he's aloof or the wisest man ever, and that was Turner. He was very much whatever you needed him to be then, because he was just getting by and figuring it out.
And getting them to understand your POV for their POV to deliver. How did you get them to trust in your process?
Yeah.
And then deliver it to the level that they did?
Yeah, this was the fun part because in the conversations, I'm finding out that no one really understood how it would be filmed.
Yeah.
And so they were all like, yeah. And then you were like, look on the camera. And we were like, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah, it was so strange because having not made films in a traditional sense before, I'm not thinking about the difficulty for them because I just need them to be themselves. But for them looking into, like everyone else is like, to look into the camera is so strange. And I'm like, then just look into the camera, it's fine, I think they came in so open. And I think my relative lack of fear for maybe not being fearful about the process for the reasons I said, maybe it's naivete, gave them confidence in just trying it. And then we went from there.
And what was the moment where you felt like, okay, they were like, yeah, we get it now. It makes sense. Was there a particular scene or moment in the process that like it all came together for all of them?
Honestly, it was right away. Like good actors are good actors, and it's immediate. Once they attempted, it was just a matter of them making sure that they looked back at a certain point on the lens so that it looked like they were looking through. And then it was just about the other elements of acting that I was concentrating on.
And then it's just there's that parallel of Ethan who was starred in When They See Us, and his character that he played of the real person, Yusuf Salam, someone who was wrongly accused at one of the Central Park Five, and then this kind of parallel correlation. That's kind of very serendipitous.
That kind of makes me sad in that both of those stories are ones that have to do with injustice for young black men in the community. But I think, and that was When They See Us.
Yeah.
Anjanu was his mother in that one.
So reuniting them.
Yeah, was kind of cool. But yeah, that just speaks to like the over-indexing of struggle narratives in the black community.
Yeah. And with that, because I know that when we've spoken before, and there was a conversation about people seeing this film and feeling like, well, is it hopeful? Where do we find joy? How do we feel inspired from that and not be weighed down by it, because it is a heavy film.
Yeah.
But also their relationship, the boys' relationship, and the way they leaned on each other for support despite their circumstances. Yeah. How did you want, or the intention of people navigating the story, what to come away with that feeling of like, is there hope?
Yeah.
Can we?
It's such a weird, I think maybe when we ask questions to the audience, I would love for you all to think about what would be the best synopsis for this film that would get you to go to it without hearing about the hype of Nickel Boys and those types of things, because I think I even have qualms or trepidation about thinking about how the story either does catharsis or doesn't do catharsis, either is hopeful or isn't hopeful. It's like I think what I'm interested in is making an arrangement of images and experiences through the camera, through someone's point of view, with like deep rigor that offers someone a genuine experience. And like we're all experiencing the world and narratives when we're watching movies, but I mean one in which is like you're truly imaginatively completing the film, and how that makes someone feel is how they feel, and in this narrative, I think that's kind of more interesting to me than the notion of hope or the notion of fear or despair, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And also, then you took care with us, I think, because you were restrained in the parts where you could have been. We could have seen the brutality. Hearing it was powerful and emotional enough. But I'm going to be very basic. Did you do that on purpose? What was your reasoning for not showing us in detail what was happening to these boys?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. It's one. Maybe you all notice, if you've seen Hell County this morning, even that I'm like really interested in the relationship between the camera and the human, the production of blackness that has been integrated into film and photography, which I like to call the sort of technology of racism. And to unpack that means like you have a racist idea and you take a photo of someone, and this becomes the material proof, because what you're trying to prove doesn't exist. What you're saying doesn't exist outside of the concept, and you need something to project that truth onto. Photography is reductive enough for if you incept someone's mind, you can allow them to believe whatever they want with the image. And so thinking about the relationship between people of color, the over-index of struggle narratives, how many images we all have in our heads of people of color from the continent of Africa, from the States, from the UK, in turmoil. We just don't need to see anymore necessarily. We already have those images. And oh yeah, this is interesting maybe for you guys. The best way that I can explain this to my students is there's this essay by Slavic Zizek. I can't pronounce his name very well. It's called A Holiday from History. And he says in it, and it's his American context, he's like, remember 9/11, like how horrible it was. And they were like, and sorry to say it so flippantly, I'm just trying to explain it. It's horrible what I'm saying. There were bodies falling from the sky. People were jumping. There were like limbs all over the street. Like it was carnage. How many of those images have you seen? And I was like, this is me reading, talking to myself, being like, fuck. I've only seen that silhouette of that guy falling upside down. It's a pretty iconic image. And then he's like, remember the famine in Ethiopia? Remember the cartel when they did the thing to the thing to the thing in the other country? How many images have you seen of those? I'm like, everyone, because they're always on the cover of every newspaper. He's like, what does that mean? Does it mean that it happens to them and not us? We know that's not the case because it did happen to us, but what's the relationship between the domination or the acceptance of those images and the acceptance of the problems? And so with that in mind, and also the idea of making the camera a literal organ in which you bring it into your body and you're making images as an extension of your consciousness. You're using the camera as an extension of your consciousness, processing things in order to make meaning, controlling the viewer's attention to what's happening in a very specific order. You realize if you think about trauma and the camera being your eyes, you don't see it necessarily. Like when I've been spanked as a child, I'm not like looking at my leg, from the third person perspective, being like, damn, that hurts. Stop, Dad. I know you love me. Sorry, that was a bad joke. Yeah. And so it's like actually thinking about the event.
Yeah.
And maybe even what happens and maybe even that the event is just, we almost make that event the most important element, when in fact that's just the beginning. It's like a slow buzz for the rest of your life. And so how do you not have people focus too much on the event itself and maybe more the consequences or the structure, the system that encouraged it?
Thank you. Guys, it's your turn. Anyone got any questions? Please raise your hand. We've got some mics.
Hello.
Hey.
All right. I'm American as well. There's two questions I really wanted to ask.
Ooh.
What camera did you use to film this? Because there was a lot of like really close shots, and as I sat here and watched this particular piece, I'm thinking to myself, like, the POV vision for, like, as a content creator itself is something that, like you said, that people really don't think about. It's very difficult to make people like it in a way, And throughout this particular film, as I'm watching it, I've had multiple different emotions of, one was retention. It was like, whoa, this is taking a long time, like, to get to the point of it all. And then it was like, and then it was like, oh man, this is flashbacks of my own history. It was getting aggressive. And then I was like, oh, he won. He made me feel something. So,
You were fighting it, huh?
Yeah, it was very difficult.
I didn't know it was a war.
It was definitely a war. So, yeah, what camera did you particularly use? And how did you manage to break out of the cycle of, because for me to even think about filming something like this, even for social media, my brain just goes, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. What is your process of going through that? Because I know it probably was very difficult for you to, do something unorthodox.
Have you? Thanks for your question. Have you seen Hell County this evening?
No.
Okay, that will help answer, because this seems like out of nowhere, but the camera language of this film not only emerges from it. There are 4 scenes in Hell County this evening in which it's shot the exact same, and so I say that because you'll notice the relationship between time when you're genuinely, especially in a first-person perspective, when you're aligning the time of the audience with what's happening on screen, and the moment is something that I like to call the epic banal, which is a moment that's like super quotidian and very normal, but has some element in it that elevates it to the symbolic and the metaphoric and the experiential. I like to say like a sunset rising in a moment, you know? There's something universal about that ineffable flash of insight that happens when there's like some sort of beautiful peak in a moment that everyone knows. And also aligning the time of the audience and the time there is a way to almost mesmerize someone. I call it carrying consciousness. You know, it's like the main difference between cinema and the photograph. It's that, you know, in cinema, you're constantly like going back and forth. But if the image is right, in photography, you're constantly going back and forth. But if it's in the moving image, you're very much, sometimes you forget that you're even looking because it has so many sensory elements to it. And the camera we used, there's a much longer answer to the second one, but I won't go into it. The camera we used is a Sony Venice on Rialto mode, and this was a breakthrough, right? Working with Jomo was like such a delight because he's truly a whiz. Jomo Frey is his last name, but it's a 6K camera that's huge, but Rialto mode allows it to break. It breaks off the lens and a capture plane that has an umbilical cord to the rest of the system, and so it allows you. It's like the cameras that they used in Top Gun. It's never used in this way, you know. But the cameras used in Top Gun, so they could fit them in tight spots. But then it also has the power to be IMAX. And with that, with Panavision, super custom and like genuinely never used lenses that have sort of, I'm unsure, is it reticular correction? No, it has. They're old antique lenses that are retrofitted for the Sony Venice, so they have aberrations in the way in which their lenses are built. It gives you like a depth. There's like all these elements as to why it sort of fills. It has that volume that you feel. But I'd also just say that first-person camera is the internet right now. Everyone is doing it. It's the nature of capturing something with your iPhone, you know? The only difference is between this and the observational, between that and the observational logic I'm talking about is that it's not, people don't use that with selective focus, with a shallow depth of field, so you can actually control someone's attention. There's no depth perception, so it's just like a block of things that people can look around. And then also, typically people look like this, and then they do this. Sometimes they'll do this, they do this, and they do this, so there's a latency to it. But if you use your cell phone right now, and you use the zoom like this, and you just like, you looked only through your, like people used to do with the old cameras, you know? That's why someone asked that interview yesterday about the found footage and why sometimes the found footage in those old VHS tapes feels like a person's controlling one's vision. It's because the person has to look through to see everything, and like, you can quite literally see how they're encountering the world, you know? Unless their other eyes open, which is just really weird. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, well, thank you so much for the film. It's a lot to sit with, but in a good way, which is just, I was going to say something more eloquent and I didn't, which is probably helpful. So about kind of, I was thinking when you said about your synopsis and drawing on something I thought about, yeah, which is that a lot of the film feels like being, this isn't much in the way of a synopsis, but maybe it's part of one, that a lot of the film feels like it's sort of in a haunted house, but sort of in a lot of ways the most beautiful parts of one. And thinking about it, it's obviously an ordeal film, but unlike almost any ordeal film I've seen, in a lot like that, it is, there is a question here, by the way, but there is a lot of tranquility and a lot of relief, which is kind of quite unusual, because often you're kind of suffocated with the characters and hemmed in. But in this, there's so much sort of openness, there's open spaces and peace, and I was just wondering how you navigated that, sort of maintaining the integrity of the sort of suffering the characters are experiencing while just letting the film and them breathe as well, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I love your synopsis too. Yeah. It also connects to an unanswered part of your question, sir, is that, you know, if you even take a glimpse at cinema history, specifically with films of people of color, they're sort of I use over-index a lot, but they're over-indexed with either blaxploitation or a sort of subservience to traditional white narratives or trauma films. And what I've always been interested in, and this is from photographing in the South, is the quote-unquote epic banal, the interstitial, the time between the large events that we tend to focus on for narrative continuity, for plot power, that are actually the way that most people spend their lives. And so with that, like the concept of this film is like the poetry of vision, the poetry of life, and quite literally everything in between. When you make a film like this, a really early on realization was that, typically a person makes this film and they organize the scenes so that each one's power adds up to the power of when Elwood dies. It's like the most horrible thing ever. But the opposite is what we wanted to do, which was to give the Dozier School boys life and to give the characters life, and more so to postpone their death as long as possible, which is why, his death happens blurry on the left-hand screen and it's kind of over, and then you're back into the life of Turner. And with that concept, we want you to be with him, We want you to look with him, and to look with him photographically, to look with him poetically, because, Jomo and I asked, like, what would these two be if they were born today? Yeah, maybe they'd be artists, And I would reckon that all of you all see the world poetically. I think all you all see the word photographically, because photography has completely reinscribed our consciousness and reinscribed, communities and society anyway. But yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Huge fan, and huge fan of Hale County. And my husband bought me your book of photography when I was getting ready to shoot my first feature film, which I've just finished. And I just wanted you to know that actually I would come home from shooting every night and like eat dumplings really, really quickly. And then I would flick through your book from the front cover to the back cover.
Damn, thank you.
No, it's your work is incredibly inspirational, and having just gone through it, I'm just like, anyway, you're amazing. But I do actually have a question, which is about editing and the hell of editing potentially, and suddenly all those voices coming in, and I feel like it's so clear in the film, the whole question of I don't want to say POV because that feels technical, but of perspective. When you're with Elwood, when you're with Turner. And I was really interested in the archive, and just like from an editing point of view, when you were going through the story, how you gave that archive its own character to sort of justify that it didn't feel like we're popping out to something kind of educational. It still felt like it had a persona and a personality and a perspective. And I just wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I really love that. A persona, a personality, and a perspective for the archive. I think all archives have exactly what you're talking about in their own context. Like, I think if we went to an archive that was like, the archive of one specific family, it would have everything that you're saying. That could be a description. And I think in between moments, accidentally captured moments in that archive would be the moments that I would use. I would pull it out of the context of the archive that is the larger framework or contextualization, and try to find moments in which there's something epic banal happening, or like when you really see someone. My favorite thing is like when you're watching a camera, an archival moment in which it's just like someone filming on the street and everything's normal, everyone's a statistic of the past, and then like something happens where you genuinely get to see someone, like two people are walking and someone like buckles over in laughter and they look over their shoulder and they glance at the camera and you're like, oh, I see you. Like, that's a person. Everyone else is just, the noise of what the camera is capturing. Like, they're not wholly full. Finding those moments, specifically ones of people of color, specifically considering the imbalanced power dynamics of the camera across history, to me is called rescuing someone from the archive, you know, where you give them like a new life in the film. And with that, the goal is to, you know, I had like crazy prompts for my archival researcher, Allison Brandon, and Alex Westfall and Gallard Prudent. Was like, I want you to find someone, and it's the same way that I come up with images, but like, I want you to find someone tripping on the street, falling from any time between 1950 and 1990. Go, you know? And then not often, they actually found that one, but not often they would find it, but it puts them in the mindset to like not be looking for images that are illustrative, you know? Which is almost the nature of filmmaking, you know, where people write a script and then they try to make images that illustrate what they're talking about. But this process is opposite that, in which you make images that are dense, that are poetic, that are interstitial inside the life of someone, that I call them adjacent images, that are one or two levels of abstraction away from narrative thrust. But they have it because they're in the life of the person, so it doesn't matter, you know? And then, then you string those things together. You throw in these archival moments, and then you have something like this, which, and it's way more complex than that, of course, but something like this, which becomes a contemporary archive for the range of ways in which people have interacted with, Black folks have interacted with the camera over time. You see the way that Jomo and I shot this film, Black point of view, hands in it like Sony Venice, you know, shot at 4:3, long lenses, shallow focus, and as he's mentioning, it sort of feels poetic. It feels like it's giving relief to the folks. I like to say that the images have a strategic ambiguity, but this is like specific to my photography, but all the conversations are kind of the same, in which it allows you to complete the narrative that like Black skin is content. Black skin is a Rorschach test for your relationship to the community. The way that we're filming the characters, and then you see the way that Sidney Poitier is filmed when he was in the Defiant Ones. You see the way that the news folks have been filming people on the street since the 70s. And that should present a problem, at least in the way in which the residue of the way of looking at people of color across time has produced the way that we look at ourselves and the way that other people look at us. And that, yeah, it's like a fun task to try to make continuity out of that chaos.
You did it so well.
Thanks.
You did. Yes, one more here, I think.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. In Hell County, like you capture this like such like beautiful observation of like you said, like poetry of life, or like this little moment. And like you said, there's like great similarity like towards like Nickel Boys. And what I'm curious is that how do you find the difference of like from photography background to capture it, and then now you have to kind of imagine and actively recreate it? Do you find it like natural, or is it like hard, or it's easy?
Well, I mean, easy is relative and never really easy, you know? Like you see those athletes that just do wild things and you're like, damn, that shit looks so easy. If you ask them, they're like, I mean, it's relatively easy, but I've also been doing it for 30 years, you know? And so the ease, I think, what allows the images to be made on set is because I've spent so much time making images, you know? So, you know, Jomo has a very specific, Jomo's talented in many ways, but his ability to like work with emotion and light is like a real kind of like unspoken talent of a lot of DPs. You know, you think a lot of DPs are framing and they make poetic images. Yes, that can be true. Jomo's really, really sensitive, like emotionally powerful creator of a scene, you know, amongst other things. And so once Jomo gets the light right, I can frame it like boom, because I've just been making so many images. And that translation, the connection is that, and then the actors bring it to life. If they can't bring it to life, then all the craft work is null. You know, it matters nothing. Like we need Ingenue to be not only a convincing person, but a real person. We need Brandon and Ethan to like look down the barrel of the lens with the same emotion they would look at each other in a loving moment and in a tender moment, but also in a questioning moment and maybe in a slight hateful moment. And then everything kind of comes together. So I would say it was just muscle memory of making images.
You mentioned the true Dozier boys, and I don't know whether men, who will be now men if they're still alive, I don't know if to call them survivors or I don't know what the word is, but is this an just to go back to that, is it an honor? Are you honoring them? Are you positioning them in history, making sure they're remembered? What is this for those people?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked the question. I like to say that the film is an experiential monument.
Okay.
So it's trying to give you all access to history in the same way that someone passes down an oral history or the result of that, in which you can speak to the history because it's just been ingrained into your body. Like, how do you make someone have an approximate vicarious physiological relationship to the events of the past, and not through spectatorship, though obviously that's built into the camera and it's built into cinema, not through third-person camera, but through kind of like living it and conceptually experiencing it in however means possible, so that it kind of can't be erased. You know, it's the type of monument that is internal, and then, you know, when the books are gone, you're like, but this happened to them, and I actually felt it, because that's when people actually believe things. You know, you can forget what someone told you, but you very rarely forget what you felt.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you spoken to anyone?
No, I'm actually excited to. I think this will happen at some point.
Okay.
But no, I didn't go to Florida, didn't walk the grounds. Jocelyn and I went to the research that Coulson did. It takes you to the Dozier document, I think I've mentioned to you before, which is just 150-something page dossier, I don't know, like a forensic account of the excavation, the organization of the grounds, every button they found, every marble they found, just everything in scientific, devastatingly clear terms, which is how the documentary process it just became immediate. It was like, oh, these images. There's no image more powerful than the image of one of the portraits of those kids. Yeah. You know, like, you know, we're gonna be making a fiction film and we're gonna try to do this and do that, but there's nothing more powerful than this. This has to be in it. The goal is, or the trick is like having it in it so that it's not just an illustrative thing, you know. And I think we found a way, but yeah, it's letting, not that you're asking this, but it's the leap is easy if you don't consider genre, and you always let the material or the origin produce the form, as opposed to imposing form onto the thing you want to do. Like, oh, I want to tell this story about me and my mother. I'm gonna make a documentary. Okay, hey mom, how's it going? You know, or I'm gonna tell this thing about this thing that happened to me. Okay, I'm gonna use some actors. Why don't you use someone else's home video footage as a proxy for you? Like, where is the emotion? Where does the emotional weight have the most visual resonance? Upwards and not downwards. I think it's really useful to think about.
Thank you very much. Guys, Nickel Boys is in cinemas January the 3rd. Please tell everybody to go and see it. Thank you, RaMell.
Yeah, no, thank you.